in my travels as a teacher trainer, and in my experience as a headmaster when I was a headmaster of a classical school here in Pennsylvania, I began to notice as I would engage in conversation with other headmasters and travel, do some training at some other schools, that most classical schools and co-ops were engaged in a kind of entrepreneurial adventure full of passion. And they were making great sacrifices to renew classical Christian education, both in these homeschooling co-ops and in these schools. That just meant a few things. That's true of most startups. Do you know what I'm going to say? Do startups have a lot of money and time? They don't. No, maybe a few do. Some angel investor says, here's $1 million. I'd like to give this to you. When our classical Christian school started in Pennsylvania, we did have a donor who gave us not that amount of money, but a significant chunk that helped the school year to year know that we were going to make budget. But that's not the case with most schools and co-ops. So it's kind of an all hands on deck endeavor. Everybody's working and everybody is trying to renew a tradition that they haven't received very well themselves. So how do we give what we haven't received? Just add this to the culture of a startup. Not only are we trying to start a new business, we've never really been in this business before. So what does it mean to be an educator? Many of us came into education out of this compulsion and passion, but we hadn't planned our careers to become educators. Actually, that ended up to be a challenge, but also a blessing, because it turns out that being trained to be an educator in most modern universities is actually not helpful. Just put it that way. There's some things that are helpful, but a lot of it is just not helpful because you're not learning the tradition of classical Christian education well in the typical education department. When I was a headmaster, I would much rather hire somebody who was passionate about a few disciplines like history, or literature, biology, or physics, mathematics, and had loved those things and kept studying those things even after graduation from college. I'd much rather hire someone like that than someone who had an education degree, generally speaking. There were always exceptions. Some of you may have a degree in education, and you're the kind of person that I would have wanted to hire. But most often, it was somebody who loved learning and didn't want to study about learning, just wanted to learn. So that's just first and foremost a point I want to make. Do you love learning? Do your teachers love learning? Do they want to step into the true, the good, and the beautiful? Your teacher training program must assume that and cultivate that, or you're just going to be trying to drive a car without gas. You're going to be pushing uphill, as it were. But when someone is leaning into Christ, the Logos, who is the author of all that's true, good, and beautiful, and wants to explore and know him and his world and the people he has created, that is so important. And that's fundamental. It's kind of 101, isn't it? It's like, well, of course. And yet this is the very thing that we often miss. Are we cultivating our foundation such that we love Christ, that we love truth, and we want to explore and know? So when I would interview teachers, often I would ask this question, and this is true of a lot of educational leaders in the classical Christian renewal. I'd want to know what that person has been reading in the last 12 months. And I would ask for a list of everything that person could think of that he or she had read. And then I would say, please take one of these books and just give me like a one-page essay describing why this book was meaningful to you. And then I would look at that book list, and then and not only would I, of course, maybe chat about the book that had been mentioned. Let's say it was C.S. Lewis's Screwtape Letters. Oh, you've read the Screwtape Letters. Tell me, why was that meaningful to you? But then if there were other books on that list, I would inquire, is this person really reading and learning and loving it? You just learn a lot when you ask that question. Do you agree? So those are fundamental things. Do you have people in your co-op or your school who continue to want to learn? Because really, the reason we should be attracted to education as a profession is because we love our children, we love students, We love the sons and daughters of the church, and we want to raise them up. That's number one. But closely aligned with that is, I love getting to know Christ, the Logos, and his world. And I have, therefore, an insatiable appetite to know. And Aristotle was right, therefore, when he said that all learning, all knowledge begins in wonder. And wonder is this, it doesn't just mean kind of like, I'm astonished. It does mean that. But it also means, not only am I astonished when I look at, say, the starry heavens, but I'm aware of my ignorance. I'm aware that I don't know, and I want to know. I'm hungry to know. And so if a human being, teacher or student, doesn't have this hunger to know, doesn't have wonder, we're just not going to make much progress. So everything I'm going to say just assumes that fundamental reality. You know, you don't want to be pushing a rock uphill with your teachers. If you have teachers who don't have that yet, that's where you have to start, cultivating wonder and kindling that love to know. That's why so many teachers really become teachers, because they want to turn on the lights in the souls of other students. They want to show others. They love helping others to see what they have seen. And this is Luke 6. The student is not above his teacher, but when he's fully trained, he will be like his teacher. But if a blind man leads a blind man, will they not both fall into a pit? It's Luke 6. A teacher is the opposite of a blind man. The teacher is someone with really good eyes. The teacher is someone who has seen the true, the good, and the beautiful, seen Christ in 1,000 places, and wants to help others to see what he or she has seen, and leads them to do so. You can't see for your students. They have to see with the soles of their own eye, but you can lead them to the place where they will see. You're a guide. So do you have teachers like that? If you don't, that is fundamental to teacher training. So if you are a leader of teachers, that's a question you need to always be asking. Are we as human souls seeking to see and help others see? This is one of the great joys of being a teacher, by the way. It's not the compensation, generally speaking. It's that joy. And if you meet somebody who's in business and making a lot of money, but loves the truth, the good, and the beautiful, you will find them wistfully looking at your profession, because you get to pursue the true, the good, and the beautiful every day as a part of your life. They don't. And so this is one of the attractions of the teacher. I get to be engaged in these high human things all the time, helping others to engage these high human things all the time. But as a profession, it doesn't generally pay as well as, say, going into software engineering or starting a software company or whatever it may be in business. Okay, and then I just say one other fundamental fact, because I've got to keep moving on here, is that back to the point about homeschools and schools often being like a startup entrepreneurial organization or company, there aren't a lot of resources. So as I would travel around, I would note, boy, I'd ask headmasters, so tell me about your teacher training, your professional development plan. And they would say, well, you're here for a couple of days. We really don't have a consolidated plan. We are really busy. Our teachers are teaching 6 preps and so forth. And so to squeeze in teacher training, it's really hard. Everybody's tired at the end of the day. There's just not a lot of room for it. So we're kind of learning on the job. Does that sound familiar? When do you stop and contemplate your profession and contemplate what you're doing and really think about it? So schools were just strapped. It was hard to do. It's hard to do staff training. So that motivated me years ago to start thinking about, well, how can we help? Sometimes headmasters would not even have a written plan of what they would do if they could. They just were so busy doing this good work. But you know that that's not a wise thing long-term, is it? Just like planning your day. If you say to yourself, I am so busy this week, I can't stop and plan my week. Are you kidding me? I've got to get up, put the coffee in the microwave, and get going. And if I were to try to take a half an hour to plan my day, well, that's wasted time. But is it? It actually is not. We know that to plan well is to do well. And, well begun is half done. All of those maxims. You will find that being a very wise investment if you take time to plan. So what will your teacher training plan be? And if you're a leader in your co-op or school, you have to be the one. It's your job to step back and look over the field and ask yourselves, how are people doing and how do I shepherd them and guide them? It's a kind of shepherding and pastoring role. So are you doing that if you're a leader? Are you finding the time to just step back and think? Do you have a profile card or document for each of your teachers? Do you interview your teachers and ask them how they're doing, what they need, where their gaps are, what they would like to, how they would like to grow in the coming year? I used to recommend, and a lot of other headmasters do this, that you sit down with every teacher every year and you do a kind of interviews, and they have your teachers do a self-assessment, ask themselves where their gaps are, what they need. You're doing the same thing, and then have a meeting with them, and then agree together on what the top 3 things would be that that teacher would seek to work on to grow as a pedagogue and a learner over the course of the next, say, 9 or 12 months. And we would rank them 1, 2, and 3. So let's say you have an upper school teacher and that teacher says, I really want to get better at Socratic teaching, leading discussions. And if you would agree, say, I agree, that should be your number 1. Let's make that your number 1 goal. It's September now, but by the time we get to May, you will have made significant progress in your ability to teach Socratically. Because when I meet with you, when I sit down with you, that's what we're going to be talking about. When I observe you, I'm going to be looking for that. I'm going to be trying to coach you or find others who can coach you, find the resources you need. And that, so that then at the end of May, you should be able to sit down with that teacher and say, congratulations, we have made some progress. You've matured, have you not? And then there would be a number 2 goal and a number 3 goal. And if number 3 didn't happen, fine. But 1 is going to happen. 2, there should be some progress as well. So you're creating focus and you're planning. So do you do that? Do you have a profile with yourself? How are you going to grow this year? Do you have a profile for the teachers that you work with or the other teachers that you lead? You need to plan this. So now I'm going to segue to ClassicalU and share my screen and make a few comments. I hope that I can do this in 5 or 10 minutes. And then take your questions. So, if you would make me a host, Emily, then I can have the superpower necessary to share my screen. Thank you. All right. So first of all, in ClassicalU, we've created a 3-level strategy, an overall plan of, say, 3 years, but usually it will take more like 5 or 6 to move through all 40 courses that we would have on ClassicalU. Why did we create ClassicalU? We did it because teachers and schools and homeschool co-ops just didn't have a plan in place yet. So we wanted to give them a template, a pathway, and a plan. Now, is this a plan and a pathway that fell from heaven? No. Could there be other ways of getting to maturity? Absolutely. But it's good to start with a plan, a thoughtful pathway that maybe you can modify as you go. And that's what you have with ClassicalU. So we have level 1 courses. You can look at all the level 1 courses that we have, and you can progress through them knowing that these courses were designed for teachers who were new to classical Christian education. For example, there's a course that's just an introductory course on what is classical education, because teachers need to know what it is. You need some background. And we Americans tend to think, I can learn that in 10 minutes. If you just tell me what it is, I'll know. Well, that's like asking about the culture of Poland. Yeah, are you really going to learn the culture of Ghana, or the history of Africa, or the history of democracy? You don't learn a culture and a big tradition in a 10-minute exchange. But we Americans think, Just give me the one little book. I'll be, I can do this quickly. No, it's like learning a new language. It takes some time. So this course is designed to give new teachers that familiarity. But then, of course, they need to learn what pedagogy is. So we needed a good introductory course on what it means to teach. What does good teaching look like? And how would you teach great literature? And how would you teach restfully? And what are some of the typical pedagogies that come to us in the classical tradition? And if you don't know any Latin, perhaps you want to at least be familiar with Latin so that you know how it's set up. And so you know some basic Latin, you know how declensions and conjugations work, and learn maybe 200, 250 vocabulary words so that when your Latin students are talking to you, it's not completely alien to you. There's points of connection. And then some of you might want to go deeper in Latin over the years that come. The same thing would be true with logic. In my view, every upper school teacher teaching, 7th grade and up should at least know the informal fallacies, because it's an art that's being used in every discussion and in every course, from math to history to literature to philosophy. It's a study of the way the human mind works, the way reason works. How can we not know logic? It's one of the 7 liberal arts that's really necessary to teach well, especially in the upper school. So when I was a headmaster, we tried to implement a plan by which every teacher in our upper school would get training in informal logic. Because you don't want one of your 10th grade students to come into a history class and say, "Oh, Mr. Johnson, I think what you're describing there is a causal fallacy. That's post hoc ergo propter hoc." And there are a lot of causal fallacies in historical writing. That's the fallacy where you say, because A came before B, A must have caused B. Well, that doesn't necessarily follow. Sequence doesn't mean causality. Sometimes there's a sequence that is a causal chain. At any rate, what if Mr. Johnson then has to say, "You know what, John, that's what you study in your logic class. We're in history." That is fragmented education, where the teacher doesn't even know what the students know in a classical school or homeschool setting. Okay, so you could go on to level 2 and then level 3, and it's designed to build. And I won't take time to show you just how it builds, but it is one pathway and it's one plan. Now, for teachers coming into ClassicalU, you can take a pathway assessment. This is a tool that we created a couple of months ago, and it's working out quite well. So, we have 40 courses, and your teachers might be thinking, well, where do I start? Do I just go through all of them? Do the first 12 in level 1 and then level 2? What sequence do I follow? Well, that depends, doesn't it? It depends on where your gaps are, where your strengths and weaknesses are. You might have great training in Latin, and so, well, I don't need to take that Latin course. So how do you choose your pathway? Well, we created a tool for this, and it's called the Pathway Planner. And let me show it to you. Oh, here I've got the book finder open, but let me go to the Pathway Finder. Here we are. So this is a way a teacher can self-assess and ask the questions about his or her own education. So you come in, you fill out this online form, and then you answer these questions. For example, I have a clear understanding of what classical education is, how it originated and developed over the centuries. You rank yourself 1 to 5. I can describe the ways that classical and progressive education are similar and dissimilar. No, we're getting at philosophy of classical education now. My school or homeschool uses a clear definition of classical education that informs our mission and teaching practices. We go through a number of questions across 5 or 6 different categories. And in the end, you get a report back. That's not just a simple score. It will tell you we're assessing in these 6 areas. And then we will provide to you a customized response, because you might be advanced when it comes to philosophy of education, but you might actually be kind of weak when it comes to academic leadership. So you might be a beginner when it comes to academic leadership. You might be advanced when it comes to philosophy and history. And therefore your pathway on ClassicalU should reflect that. And that's what we've done. So you get a significantly customized report that comes to you immediately. And anybody can do this for free without even becoming a subscriber. And then you get a pathway recommendation. What courses would you take in what sequence? Well, would this pathway fall from heaven? No, but it gives you something to think about as you're crafting your own educational plan. And so if you're an academic leader, we encourage you to use this, because you can have each of your teachers take this, and then you can sit down with their report and discuss it. And then from there, actually forge a path. Now you can use, of course, ClassicalU as one of your significant teacher training tools, but it, by the way, shouldn't be the only one. Your own coaching, your own conversations, other things you might want to do besides ClassicalU can be very important. But we created ClassicalU to make it convenient and to give you a kind of template to work with. And it seems to be helping a lot of people. So thanks be to God that now you can get access to some good training from veteran classical educators and professors 24/7. But just keep in mind, you can't become a great teacher simply by watching videos on a computer screen. The way you become a great teacher is to teach with guidance. It's to be coached and to keep coming back to your profession in discussion with colleagues. It's something that really does happen best communally. So you can use ClassicalU to be sure, but it needs to be paired with active discussion and coaching in your school and homeschool. In other words, it won't be sufficient. It'll still be very helpful, but it won't be sufficient to just say to your teachers, hey, here's a ClassicalU subscription, go at it, and let's talk in May. I hope it helps you, because I'm really busy. And by the way, I got to go now. No, you would want to actually have them create a path, think about what they want to do, discuss it, talk with them about it, and then schedule some meetings, maybe monthly, if not more frequently, to discuss the progress that your teachers are making as they're seeking to go through their priorities of professional development. Okay, I just have a couple more things to share, and then let's open it up for questions. We also, you've seen the course catalog, so you can go here and start just looking at the courses. And you can click on any of these, and it will take you right to the course page where you can preview the course. Here's the liberal arts tradition. It's a course based on the book published by Kevin Clark and Ravi Jain. Even before you subscribe, if you haven't, you'll see that there's some lessons that are available to preview at no cost, so you can kind of kick the tires and see if this would be a course you'd want to take. So you can do that with any course. If you want to take them for a CEU credit, because we give automatic continuing education unit credits for like 38 of these 40 courses, all approved by the ACSI. So you can get a certificate that would be automatically generated, but then you need to take the quizzes and upload a small, like, one-page essay at the end of a course. And then we do look at those and make sure that people are accountable to have done the tests and quizzing, and then you get a CEU unit certificate. But let me show you.
It's 11 o'clock.
The book finder, which is one of my favorite things on ClassicalU. The book finder is available without a subscription. Anybody can come in and use it. But you see, we have associated over 50 books, maybe 60, 75 books with the courses that we teach on ClassicalU. But here we're filtering those books, organizing them by these important categories. Like, here's philosophy of education. So you can just quickly look at the books we would recommend, more than you would read in a year, of course. But if you want to go deep in the philosophy of classical Christian education, these are the books that you should know about. And if you want to know, for example, about beauty and aesthetics, here's two great books on beauty and aesthetics related to the classical tradition. If you want to learn about academic leadership because you're an academic leader, we still think you should be reading about the tradition, so we include this book. But you'll notice some other practical books about leading teachers, like this book by Gordon Brown, an excellent book, Guiding Faculty to Excellence. This book, Wisdom and Eloquence, has a lot to do with how you plan a curriculum K through 12. They call it 12 through K planning. beginning with the end in mind. And you'll see some other practical books, like here's a great book about how to conduct meetings. If you're going to be a leader and you have to conduct meetings, it's good to know how to conduct meetings well. So this book, The Advantage, a marvelous book for any school or organization, emphasizing the importance of developing communal trust and clarity throughout the organization. So you can see the book finder is just a great way for you if you're thinking, or your teachers, you're thinking, I don't know what to read. What should I read? Well, again, here's a good place to start. You have a math or science teacher. What might they want to read that would be really related well to the classical tradition? These are some great books for your math and science educators, or for you, if you're a leader of math and science teachers. So many great books to read. You can look at, by the way, this was something I did. People kept asking me for like top 10 books. Just what would be the top 10 books I should read? Well, it's a very excruciating kind of thing to do, to choose 10 out of several hundred, but I did it. And so here's a top 10 list. I call this the 101. If you're new to classical education, you want to read across a number of these categories, I think these books are great places to start. Some of them are easy, engaging reads, like How the Irish Saved Civilization. Some of them are a little more challenging, like Joseph Pieper, well, not Joseph Pieper, like maybe the LAT is a little more challenging. The Great Tradition is a book that every classical educator should have and read. Primary source readings from the great writers like Plato, Aristotle, all the way up to C.S. Lewis on what it means to be an educated human being. Go to the source. Okay, I think I'm done. I think ClassicalU can be a great template and kind of master pathway for you, but you need to use it and adopt it according to the teachers that you have, and do some customizing and modifying of it. Think of coming to ClassicalU similar to going to a college. You have a course catalog. You won't study everything that the college offers. What will your pathway be? Will you sit down with your guidance counselor, your advisor at college, and they tell you choose a major? Well, I don't like majors so much. I like interdisciplinary integrated studies, but you can do that here with ClassicalU, and the Pathway Finder can be your kind of advisor. So I'll conclude there, and let's go to your questions and comments and concerns, and I'll stop sharing.
I think we can probably, do you want to just try having people ask their own questions?
That'd be great. I'd love it.
Okay, let's do it. There's one that, well, let's see. Heather, do you want to ask your own question? I know some of you may not want to ask your own question on Zoom. So let's do this 2 ways. If you would like to unmute yourself and just ask your question to everyone, I think you are welcome to do that. If you would rather just, because you don't have audio or video or whatever reason, if you would like to just drop your question in the chat box, then I'll make sure we're getting to those as well. But yeah, let's see. Does anyone have a question to start us off? We have one in the chat box, so I'll go ahead and read that one. There was a question asked in a session this morning, but it was not discussed. It sounds like too much. If our classical school has to turn to virtual education again for a portion of the year, do you have any advice, practical practices on how to best teach? Specifically, this person's asking about 7th to 12th math and science, but I think there are many of us here who could benefit from that answer.
Yes. Maybe 2 responses. One is our Vice President and Director of Scholarly Academy, Jolie Hodge, recorded 3 videos for classical schools on this topic, right at kind of once we realized a few months ago that a lot of schools would be using online tools. So Emily, maybe you can track down links to those and post them in the chat box. I know Jolie or Tristan could get them to you pretty quickly. Secondly, I would say this: the best thing to do, if possible, is to mirror and mimic the classroom as much as you can with this technology. Like we're doing today, having the videos on, so you can see the students and the students can participate, helping students to know, requiring them to attend and be a part of the video conversation, like you're around a table or in a classroom. If everybody turned their cameras off and was listening to a talking head giving a lecture, that would not be the best use of this technology. And that's the way online video was used primarily, even as recently as a couple of years ago. People were still using the technology with the talking head teacher and talking into a black box. The teacher couldn't see the students, just looking at a live video. That's not wise when you have the ability to turn on everybody's camera and have them all speak. The technology has gotten good enough that you can do this. So Jolie will do a good job of, in these video links that we'll share with you, showing you practically how you use a technology like Zoom to actually do that. I'll just mention one example. Zoom has breakout rooms. So if you're teaching a group of, say, math students, and you've got 20 people in the class, you could say, all right, I'm creating 4 breakout rooms, and there'll be 5 of you in each breakout room, and I want each group to be working on this particular equation to solve it, and I'll be popping into each of your groups to give you guidance as you need it. Just like you could in a classroom, breaking up people into pods for a little bit and having them work on something together. You can do that with Zoom. That's pretty interesting. Also, I would mention, you can do classroom management and class discipline with Zoom, because, and to some degree, it's even more, it's superior, because the kids can't hide in the back. You can have everybody on a chessboard right on your screen, and you can look around. You can see if people are attending or not, right? So the basic principle, I would say, is as much as possible, mimic the classroom. That would mean more sessions than maybe less. Like if you would think, let's have one Zoom class on Mondays. Let's do our history class or our math class Mondays from 10 to 11:30. We'll do a 90-minute class, and then we'll give independent assignments. That should do it. No. With mathematics, you need regular teaching, regular engagement with the teachers, at least more regular than that. Now, in a homeschooling co-op, you might have the parents already doing this as kind of co-teachers. That would be different. But you need regular engagement to learn Latin, regular engagement with a teacher or teaching coach to learn mathematics. So that might mean you would be going to at least 2, possibly 3 or more Zoom sessions with your students. Of course, there's a downside to this. It's called Zoom fatigue. It's just more fatiguing for some reason. Psychologists have been studying this to learn on Zoom. If you're doing it all day long, there's latency, trying to track the way our brains apparently track nonverbal and verbal communications. It takes more concentration. You're more easily distracted. So apparently there's it fatigues your brain more to try to engage this way than it does in a physical classroom. At least that's what some people are saying. And if you're like me, you've experienced some of this Zoom fatigue. So you don't want to do too much. So you want to look for a kind of harmony or balance here. I'll stop there. I hope that was helpful. Yeah, and I agree with Emily. If you didn't come prepared today to turn on your camera and ask live questions, that's absolutely fine. Then make sure you just put it in your chat box. But if you would like to ask your question live, that would be fine too.
Yes. I'm sharing a few links. I've got one more to share from Joelle Hodges' webinars. She gave 3, and they're all on our CAP YouTube channel. We have been giving a lot of webinars this year. And so just to let you know, we are planning to put all of those on YouTube. So you'll be able to find a lot of different resources there. We will, to answer somebody else's question, we will also be sharing recordings of all of the sessions from this summer teacher training week this week. So keep an eye out for that. We will send an email out likely at the end of next week with a link to a page that has all of the webinar videos, and I think we'll also be putting them on our YouTube channel. So again, keep an eye out for that. But Joel Hodges webinars that were from earlier this year, when we kind of all had to go virtual with school, are up, and I will share that other link. I've shared 2 hosting classes online and then beyond online classes, and there's one more that I will drop in the chat box. But in the meantime, let's see, I thought I saw another question. Maybe not. Oh yeah, here we go. Okay, so this person asks, how do you deal with parents complaining about the amount of reading in literature classes? Some claim it is too much reading and annotating to fit into the 3 55-minute home days. If we do not assign some thought questions to consider while reading, students traditionally do not do the reading. And then when they come to class, there's the problem of no one's done the reading, so it's really difficult to have a good discussion. So do you have any wisdom on that? That is also a great question for online teaching as well.
Yeah. Yes, and it's a very important question. It's related to an important pedagogical maxim, which is multum non multa, much, not many. Sometimes classical educators fall into a trap of thinking that classical education is supposed to be hard and rigorous, and that becomes misinterpreted to mean, give them a lot of stuff. They can do more. They can carry more. They can run farther and faster than they've ever thought. This is kind of like the Marine Corps for classical educators. We're going to toughen you up. You're capable of it. So step up. And that just is, I think, an exaggeration of the idea of learning to work constantly and industriously. There's a place for perseverance in industry and so on, and constancy. These are educational virtues. But rigor for rigor's sake is a mistake. I prefer vigor to rigor. Vigor means life and energy. Rigor means rigid, stiff, harsh, severe even. Now, it doesn't have to mean those things. Rigorous can just mean paying careful attention to your work and being precise and focused. That's okay. I agree with that kind of rigor, but I don't like the rigor that's rigor mortis. I don't like the rigor that is just severe and harsh. So then we're back to a question of balance and harmony again. What is the right amount? You know that your kids can carry a backpack and go to school, right? Sure, that's a good thing for them to do. It's actually healthy, strengthen them if they put it over both shoulders, not just one. So can they handle 5 pounds, 10? How about 15? Why can't they do 30? They can do 30. Well, let's just put in one more book. Let's make it 33 pounds. Obviously, there's a point at which you say, we've gone too far. And this can be true with reading as well. So how much literature are you assigning to these students? And what do you think they should be able to read independently? How long have you taken a measurement? What do you think it actually takes in terms of time? Now, of course, there'll be a range. Some students are slower, some are faster, but have you even bothered to actually try to calculate that? Because when you're speaking to parents, it's helpful to have gone through that process and not just say, oh, it's plenty, they can do that. Well, what do you mean they can do that? My kid's dying. He's spending 4 hours a night trying to get through literature and history reading. Oh, well, he must be a really slow reader. Well, so what should the page count be? And is the book harder or easier to read? Some books are 5-star books. They're hard to read. If you assign students The City of God in high school, that's a 4 or 5-star book. They're going to have to read that slowly. If you give them the Screwtape Letters, that can go pretty fast. That's a 1 or 2-star book. Or The Great Divorce, you can read that easily. It's still profound, by the way. So what's the nature of the book? At any rate, that's multum non multa. I have a lecture on that in the pedagogical principles. Here's what I would just boil it down to for upper school students. I think upper school students should be doing about 6 or 7 or so books a year in literature, going deeply with each one, taking up to a month to read a couple of Shakespeare plays, right? Not just blasting through it. Because you need to savor it. You need to give these kids a chance to actually love King Lear. And if you're just blasting through it because you've got to move, because you're covering material, because you want to get to the next book or the next play, what does that do to students? It endangers, it possibly prevents their opportunity of loving Shakespeare. So do you teach literature with a goal of love growing? And you can't do that by moving through material. And oddly enough, it's a better investment of your time even when it comes to quantity. Why? Because if you teach King Lear for, say, 3 weeks, maybe even 4, such that these kids are just soaking it in, and you're teaching them some Elizabethan language, you're giving them some context, they're memorizing some portions of the poem, maybe they're doing some dramatic readings in class, etc. What do you think might happen on Saturday for some of these kids? Because you've told them about Macbeth. They might just want to read Macbeth during their free time because you have cultivated a love for this greatest of English writers. So I would say to those parents, I want these kids to love Shakespeare. That's one of our great goals. You know, in classical circles, we joke, you know, you either like Shakespeare if you're a classical educator or you pretend to, because you know that you're supposed to. But some of you had a bad experience learning Shakespeare in high school, and you blasted through it with some teacher who didn't love Shakespeare herself or himself, and it's been passed on to you. You don't quite get Shakespeare. You didn't ever think about reading Shakespeare on a Saturday morning. So it's much better to teach deeply. And then one other comment about this is we need, if possible, I know this is a time issue, to read the text in class. And the teacher also needs to do a lot of this reading. Take a look at Josh Gibbs' course on teaching the great books. He makes this point so persuasively. A 10th grade boy or girl is not ready yet to read intelligently some of this literature. They need to be led, coached, even as they're reading. And one of the best ways to do that is for you to intone the text out loud in front of them, making some commentary as you go. That's an enjoyable, delightful experience with a great teacher, is it not? To have Josh Gibbs read Shakespeare to you, it becomes almost entertainment, but it's learning. Don't do popcorn and have all these 10th graders take turns reading Shakespeare. They don't know how to read Shakespeare yet. He calls that performing the text. You have to perform the text in front of these students, and that means taking time. So if you're reading Shakespeare or Augustine's Confessions, say, you're going through it, you're discussing it in class, because literature is for wisdom. It's a generalized subject or art that's designed to make souls wise. So you can't just cover the book and give a quiz. That's not what literature is about. You don't study English because you want to learn to speak English. You know how to speak English. Why do you take an English or literature course? It's because you want the wisdom, the treasure that is in the wisdom that's in those texts. So therefore, doing fewer books and even giving time in class for reading is really important. So that might not be what you're expecting to hear. Maybe you do need to read less. On the other hand, students at high school should be prepared to be reading about 2 hours a day, doing some work, doing some thought, what it might be math, Latin translations, reading, and around that 120-minute range. I'm thinking of the school student in particular, homeschooling students who are in class less. They will be spending more independent time outside of class because they're in classroom settings a lot less. They'll be spending more time. So I hope that'll give you some parameters, and I encourage you to take a look at Josh Gibbs' course on ClassicalU. Go to his section on performing the text, how to read and teach a great book. Take that course, and it will help you. And then you can try to set the expectations of parents. Yes, they will be reading, but I think you should be taking homework surveys. It's kind of a regular routine and protocol. About once every month, maybe every 6 weeks, send a survey. Maybe it's an online survey. Ask your students and parents, how's it going? And when students come to you every week, if you're a literature teacher or a math or science teacher, how's it going with the workload? And develop a relationship of trust here. Because if you make a bad assignment and it turns, you give them, you say, I want you to read 60 pages from the City of God. And all of your students come back and say, that took me 3.5 hours. Then the teacher would say, I'm sorry. If that was the general response, let me adjust that in the future, right? But there's a dialogue about this with students that's in a relationship of trust. And if parents see that happening, they won't be concerned. I'm sorry for that being a long answer, but it was a little bit of a hot button for me.
No, I thought that was great. There's so many different things to consider there. There's another good question.
Well, Emily, do you have a comment? Because you taught literature for 5 years at a classical school.
I did. I was thinking of all kinds of different experiences and anecdotes from my time teaching, but I agree. I mean, I think it's tempting to want to heap on, more and more books because we just, and this is so good, and this, and this, and this, and I want you to read all of it. But I think it is so much more important to be setting a foundation for teaching them how to read well and become lifelong readers than it is to get through a certain amount of content, which is the mastery approach that Novare Science also shares. It's really so much more about learning how to think like a scientist and learning these procedures and methods and thinking, a certain way of thinking about things instead of getting through a maximum amount of content in the year, because we can spend our whole lives continuing to learn details about the world and reading books. But I agree that it's wonderful to find ways to help it come alive to them. One fun thing that I really liked to do, I got to teach Pride and Prejudice, and I know that in some ways it's a story that kids now can relate to. And I had a boy who I would kind of characterize as not a very enthusiastic student. He kind of slumped down in the back of the classroom most of the time, and I know he was not reading outside of class. The books that we had to read for school. And he even got all worked up about the characters in the story and some of the choices they were making. He couldn't believe that Caroline Bingley was such a bad friend. And I was just so overjoyed and shocked when I heard him talking that way in class, because I thought, I don't believe this. You actually care about, he could have just sat in the back and not made a comment about it. But he chose to speak up about something.
That's really interesting that you did Pride and Prejudice, because I did Emma with 7th graders. Mm-hmm. That was a challenge. But you know what one of their favorite words is now? You're a valetudinarian. It means, right? And so they loved it. And then we started looking at the characters, and one of the students told me, when I first started reading, it was just words. And when we got done, they were people, right? Oh, and we had to skip a lot of it, okay? Because they're not going to read the whole book in 7th grade. Austen, you can spend a semester on that in college. So what we did is we read certain select chapters and then kind of pulled it together. And then they each decided on a character they wanted to follow. And then they gave a presentation on that character and how that character changed or stayed static within the book. And that allowed them to focus in on something they were fascinated by. But the thing I get is I'm getting a lot of hits just by saying, okay, you can read, say, 30 pages of Frankenstein, right?
Another wonderful book.
Evening, right? Because then we did the Frankenstein debate, which we actually were 1 day away from when we got shut down. We were so upset.
Oh.
And we were putting the monster on trial. So we were all ready to go, and then they shut us down. I was not going to do it online. That was really not something I could handle. So we may do it with the 8th graders this year when the 9th graders move up, so that would be fun. But, I just have parents like, I can't keep up with your syllabus because, you're reading literature. And it's like, yeah, but we do things in class. And it almost seems like they're more focused on the math and science because that's more important. But we don't consider literature, and this is a parental thing, that important. Mm-hmm. So that was my frustration, not giving too much. I am a very slow reader. I annotate my books. No one ever wants my books when I'm done with them. Okay, because there's writing and things all over them. But what I want to encourage them is to actually interact with the text and enjoy it. So we don't,
Certainly.
sometimes I have to skip a whole middle of Jane Eyre. We do the beginning and the end, because if you don't get to the end, you've missed the whole point. Okay, so I have, summaries in the middle. And even then they're complaining about something. So I don't know if it's just a mental capacity of literature is not important or what it is. So that was just my comment. And unfortunately, I've got to run before it starts raining, but I've enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sharon.
Yeah, those are all great thoughts. And I think it is hard with literature, especially. I think it does get marginalized a bit because it's easy to sort of chop it out. It doesn't seem essential, but we definitely always talked about themes as related to human life and experience, which are incredibly important as we learn to understand the world. So, yeah. So I definitely tried to talk about that a lot with my students. We would talk about, like she was saying, characters as people, and talking about I think it changes things when kids start realizing that this book that kind of seemed old and stuffy and boring, it's actually quite a lot like their experience. They don't live in that kind of culture or world or time period, but they're still, friends who are being cruel to each other or kind of stabbing each other in the back, or relationships that don't work out, or whatever it is, heartbreak or difficulty. I was going to say, I did a Pride and Prejudice tea party. That's what I was going to say earlier. That was a really fun thing that I loved doing with my classes. And I thought it was so wonderful to find ways that, of them connecting with the curriculum that they were really excited about. So we had a tea party every year when we read Pride and Prejudice, and I would make scones. So, another great question, which kind of connects back to ClassicalU a bit, is would you speak, Chris, to teaching music, K through 8 music with a classical approach? And I do want to mention to Regina, you asked this question.
I did, yes.
Hi. I do want to mention that there is a course on ClassicalU with Dr. Carol Reynolds, and she addresses a lot of, that's basically what the course is. How does she teach music with a classical perspective? And she talks about a lot of, I think you mentioned that you've been focusing on beauty, truth, and goodness, but I just wanted to mention that to you, that course is available. But Chris, I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, music is one of the 7 liberal arts. It's one of the arts that set us free. And it's also so intuitively understood to be edifying and blessed by humans. Because when you hear beautiful music, it's communicated to you directly, and the response is immediate, and it is a kind of harmony that's washing over you, harmony of number embodied in sound. And so music is a harmonizing art. And there's a way of thinking about all of education as a seeking of harmony, where we want to see and understand how the various diverse elements of this cosmos are in a kind of harmony, are coherently related. We humans love harmony. We love harmony of all kinds. Harmony of the way a room is decorated, harmony of the way a meal is presented, visual harmony. We love, the ratios that are visually represented in classical architecture, the golden rectangle and the arches and the Fibonacci sequence and so many other things that are beautiful to our eyes that are mathematically understood as well. And music is number in motion, somehow embodied, incarnated in sound waves that our ears can discern and immediately enjoy. So if I sing a bar of a particular hymn or song, you might enjoy that. But if Regina joins me and hits a perfect alto harmony with that, you will enjoy that even more. So this just means kids need, through K through 8, they need to be experiencing harmony even before they, and loving harmony or musica, even before they critically analyze it, using mathematics and ratios. This is the same thing that the classical educators of the past said about astronomy. There's a place for doing astronomy. It was one of the liberal arts too, now corresponding generally to our physics, bodies in motion, right? Geometry is study of shapes or bodies, discrete shapes or bodies, and astronomy is a study of bodies that move. Well, you can see how that leads to our study of physics today, and astronomy is a form of physics, you might say. But there's a place for young children to study a different kind of astronomy, a musical astronomy, which is this is the twinkle twinkle little star astronomy, where they gaze at the heavens, they study the heavens, they watch the heavens, they name the heavens, and they wonder at the heavens. Even the word desire, by the way, is related in the Roman mind to the heavens, because Sidereus in Latin means constellation of stars. So desire means of the stars. So when you are being led upward, as it were, with a yearning to know something true, good, and beautiful, it's as if it's a similar motion in the Roman mind to gazing at a starry night. Isn't that interesting? So that means students need to be experiencing it all the way through and learning to perform it, learning to sing. Every student should be learning to sing. It should be a part of the curriculum. They should also, I think, if possible, learn to play a simple instrument like the recorder, so they begin to see that they can make music in other ways besides their voice. Some classical schools and co-ops I know start with the violin. The local school here that I used to lead has violins for every student, those little small ones starting, and every student learns for 3 or 4 years the violin. Not because they necessarily will become professional performers of the violin, but so that they can enjoy harmony. So I would say this too, in a classical curriculum, in the elementary school years, well, let me say this first. Did you know what Plato called elementary school education? You can, Socrates in the Republic. The Greek word is musika. That was his word for lower school education. It's education in music. It's in harmony. It's a study of harmony, and it's an experiential education where the world is perceived as a living museum, and all education is in wonder. So that word musika has lots of connotations in Greek, and it still comes through a little bit in English. We use words like I'm bemused or I'm amused, which means I'm without inspiration. It's related to the word muse, right? Muses that bring inspiration and yearning and wonder. So a musical education is, in the classical tradition, it's lower school education. It was one word used to summarize the whole thing, because to do mathematics is to do harmony, to learn literature and to see how to study Latin grammar is harmony. Whenever you resolve a mathematical problem, you resolve a discord, my friend Andrew Kern likes to say, a discord into a harmony. And you do the same thing when you finish translating a Latin sentence. It's something you don't fully understand, and you resolve it into something you do understand. It's a kind of harmony, and all students love harmony. All students love being able to resolve things into harmony. That's why if any of your students can do mathematics, they will probably like mathematics. If your students can do Latin and successfully translate Latin sentences, they will say, I like Latin. When they don't know how to do it and they stumble and fall and they can't resolve the sentence into a good translation, they will say things to you like this: Mommy, I don't like Latin. Your job is to help them to be able to do it, to resolve the discord into a harmony, and then they will say, Mommy, I love Latin. So at any rate, musica is this general concept, can be used as a general concept for the whole. Second comment is this: in a lower school classical curriculum, K through 6 anyway, there really only are 4 major domains of study, and music is one of them. Music should be present all the way through. What are the other 3 domains? Well, mathematics, and you can see the nice relationship between the two. Mathematics and music, and then there's really only 2 other things you really need to do: literature and reading. Reading and literature. Reading the poetry, the songs, the books of our culture, and beginning to memorize much of it, or at least a good bit of it, and enjoying learning to love stories and acquiring the ability to read them independently. And then the other is language, grammar, which Latin is a great language for that to happen in. So we're back to multum non multa again. It's better to just think about those 4 things as what you really need to do, K through 6. You might add nature study, not science, but nature study. It's a collecting, naming, enjoying, tasting, touching, experiencing, so that getting outside a lot. So anyway, your comment, Regina, led me to just talk generally about the lower school curriculum. It should be full of music. And then the students move beyond that kind of personal engagement of music. Sometimes we might even call that music appreciation, although I don't care for that phrase too much. You want kids to love music and to learn how to make music. And then when they get into their upper school, they start to study how to read it, how to analyze it, what harmonies are, why they are harmonies, et cetera. The mathematical aspect of music begins to be a part of their study as well.
Thanks for your.
You're welcome. Sorry, the way leads to way. It's hard for me to answer a discrete question discreetly. It just leads to the whole. Well, we'll just go to 11:45. So we'll go for about another 7 or 8 minutes. Who would like to go next?
There's a question that's been sitting here for a little bit in the chat. This is more of an online teaching question. How do you check for understanding via online education without assigning so much work like we mentioned before?
Yeah. Well, it is a problem, at least a difficulty to address. If you use a learning management system, this will be helpful rather than email. So, for example, our online school, Scully Academy, we use a learning management system, or LMS, called Schoology. Lots of schools use Schoology. Colleges, like Wheaton College, I think, uses Schoology. You might have heard of Canvas. That would be another LMS. But it's just it makes it easy for students to upload documents and assignments, and for you to track student work. With an LMS like Schoology, you can actually have, you can upload a video of your, review of a paper a student has written. My wife is a literature professor, and I hear her doing this all the time. She'll be reading a paper from one of her students, and she will say, I hear her recording these audios or videos. Marie, I really appreciated your second draft. I noticed that you did such and such and such and such. She'll give a 5 or 10 minute response. So it's very easy to give feedback to students, manage documents, do grading and assessments. So my question for you is, are you using an LMS? If not, you're going to have to track lots of email and attachments, and that is tedious. Other than that, I think you just have to be judicious about the assignments you give and the clarity with which you give them. You don't want students to be confused, like, I didn't understand what she asked me to do, and then they don't do the right thing. Make sure when you're on Zoom giving an assignment, the document is available to them. Don't just trust your oral communication, be redundant. So say it, put it in the chat box, send an attachment via email, and then say, do you have any questions? Maybe copying parents on it as well. Maybe if you can, at the beginning of the semester, lay out what all of the assignments are going to be. If you can plan that well, of course you can change things and say, this is, we're going to do these 2 papers. There's going to be these 6 quizzes, and there's going to be these reader response papers, whatever it may be. Make it really clear what's supposed to happen and when, so that week to week you're not saying, well, I think, this week, here's what I'd like you to do. How about, I'll tell you what, I'd like you to write a 2-page reader response to Pride and Prejudice. Okay, and why don't you do? No, you need to be very clear all the way through. Put it in writing so that you don't have people saying, well, I didn't understand. I bet some of you are better at this than me, by the way. So you feel free in the chat box, or to just open up your camera. If you do this better, then I just suggested, please, please give us your advice.
I always like the crowdsourced, advice when we can get into I really miss being at conferences live this year. That's something I really enjoy doing. And I know probably many of you are in that same position, missing out on seeing people face to face. But I love getting to do this too, and getting to chat and share our ideas and experience. I think that is all the questions that have come up in the box so far. So if anyone has like a last question they want to throw out live or throw it in the box, I have shared a few ClassicalU courses in the box. And please remember that ClassicalU is a subscription service. It is $19.95 a month for an individual, but you can also get group rates for your school. If you're doing more than 10 subscriptions, that gets to a group rate level. But it's excellent for teacher training and just for training yourself, whether you are a home educator or a classroom educator. And as Chris mentioned at the beginning, there's several different levels of training there. So I've thrown a few courses in, things that have been mentioned, but there's so many more on the website. And all of Joelle Hodges' talks are in the chat box as well. She gave, again, those 3 webinars on teaching online, since she has so much experience teaching with School A and directing the School A Academy. Here's a question about oral examination. What do you think about that?
Yes, my dentist requires them at least annually. I think all. Anyway, no, I don't like going to the dentist because every time I go, the dentist says, your teeth are fine. I don't have a cavity, never have. My wife keeps saying, you got to go to the dentist, but it's just, so I've been blessed with what the dentists call resistant teeth for whatever reason. I wish they were more beautiful and white, but oh, never mind. So oral examinations, I think they're great. In fact, the Oxford tutorial method that's centuries old, if you were lucky enough to go to Oxford University, that's primarily the method that's used. You sit down with your tutor or professor, and he looks at your paper and gives you all kinds of comments, and you have conversations about it, and then he tells you what to do next. That's good assessment. It's coaching too. It's not just a multiple choice test, et cetera, and then that's what your GPA is. Sorry, no, it's human. It's interactive. There's an engagement, and good assessment is a way of helping students to know how they're doing against a standard of mastery and what to do next to achieve or get closer to mastery. That's what assessment should be. And what happens in lots of other professions and in athletics and in music, this is how people are guided to become better. It's human. But to do an oral examination or assessment is not as efficient, is it? It's hard to do. And if I were to do an oral assessment of, say, your knowledge of logic right now, well, what would I do with 25 of you on a call or so? How do I do that? But if I could sit down with each of you one-on-one, we could have a thoughtful assessment. So it's beautiful, it's meaningful. Students generally love and appreciate it, but it takes time. Still, if you can work in oral assessments, I would do it. I would much rather with a group of Latin students say, have the students working on some translation work in a classroom, and then I would call students up one-on-one, and I would say, okay, let's just talk about how are you doing with your vocabulary mastery. And I would have a conversation about it. I think I'm doing pretty well. Okay, let me just ask you a few questions. Yeah, what does lupus mean? How about portus? What about oculus? Okay, what does finis mean? Urbs, and just do a little spot checking. Maybe ask them to translate a sentence on the spot that I would give them, maybe even orally. And then you would see. And maybe ask some questions about grammatical. How are you doing with the subjunctive? We're teaching the subjunctive. Last mood you usually teach. Well, so tell me what your understanding of the subjunctive mood is. What are the various things it's used for in Latin? And you quickly get a sense of who that student is. And you're also building a relationship. And when that student perceives that you want to help him, this is why students love their coaches so much. if you want to become a great soccer player and your coach is a great soccer player, you've got a nice chemistry there, don't you? Because then when that coach says, John, come over here, let me show you how you do this kind of pass. Is John interested? Yes, because he loves soccer. He wants to play soccer well. We're back again to, are you enabling the students to love what they're learning? Because if your students don't love Latin, if they don't get Latin, they don't see why it's relevant or important, and you call them over, you're just pushing a rock uphill. But that oral examination gives you the opportunity to do a number of things at once. Yes, you want to assess what they know, but you also are coaching, and you're also shepherding. You're also guiding. It's a lot easier to do that when you're having a conversation. So I love it. If you can work that in as much as you can, given the time constraints, it's one of the best things you can do. Okay, looks like we have one more here. And well, we're out of time, but I'll give this a quick shot. Given that we're lifelong learners, and personally with me going into my second year of teaching, how do we establish standards of mastery aside from the national standards, such as the next generation of science standards? It's a great question. And when you're new to an art that you're starting to teach, this is a question you will have. Let's say that you find yourself teaching logic. You think, okay, here we go. You're going to learn as you teach. That's how it's happened for many of us. Well, a good text should lay out what some of those standards are. For example, in one text we produce is The Art of Argument, Informal Fallacies. It lists 28 of the most common fallacies. So there's a sense, if you learn those fallacies, that is mastery. It lists 3 high-level concepts. Is the argument relevant? Is it presuming something that's illegitimate? And is it lacking in clarity? Those are 3 ways that human reasoning goes wrong, right? It's just not relevant. It's assuming something that's not true and it's not clear. So the text will help you. And then I would just do some additional research in the best way to do it, actually, find someone who is already a master of that art and ask him or her. Ultimately, mastery should be incarnated in a teacher who's a magister. Magister could mean master, someone who is a captain of a ship, someone who's a teacher in a classroom. So if you want to learn how to navigate and sail a boat, you would ask in Latin the magister. The magister was the word for captain as well. He would teach you how, and he would tell you as well. Now, are these things written down? Yes. So you can go to various organizations, but a good Latin text, like Wheelock's college level Latin text, it's there. The things that need to be known are in the table of contents. And I know you'd want to go further than that. You probably want a summary of, maybe you wouldn't want to look through 4 pages of the table of contents in a Latin text. Someone could summarize that for you and say, well, you need to know the 5 verb noun declensions and 4 verb conjugations, and you need to know the top 1,000 most frequently used Latin words. Those would be the standards that you'd want to achieve. But I have to leave it there. It's a good question. I'm thinking, are there some other places where there's some discrete collections of mastery? They're not coming to mind, except for the national organizations. And I don't always trust them. So that's another problem. Okay. Well, I just want to thank you myself. You've traveled with us for over an hour now. And we probably should get back to our families and work and so forth. Thanks so much for what you're doing, helping renew classical Christian education in your homes and schools. I would just direct your attention to an article that was just written by Rod Dreher that I think all of you would appreciate. It's at a blog article he released yesterday. Could classical colleges bye-bye? Are we saying hello to classical Christian education? I forget just how he titles it, but you'll see it on the website of the Imaginative Conservative, Rod Dreher. Thank you, everyone, and God bless you.